Welcome to the session of Dastaan-e-Hind, Dastaan-e-Aurat. It's my pleasure to be speaking to Saba after a very, very long time. Um, I think, Saba, we last spoke in 2003 when you were um, researching the other song. And then you disappeared somewhere east, and I didn't. You disappeared into the east somewhere, and then your trilogy turned up, your trilogy of films. And then you suddenly dropped out, and I often wondered where you were, what you were up to. And I had no idea that you were working on this book, this absolutely wonderful book. And so let's begin by congratulating you on this stupendous achievement. This book that is magnificent. It's magnificent. Um, Very often while reading it, I just needed someone around to tell them how good it was. And whoever was around would hear me praise the book, or if not, no one was around, I'd send WhatsApp to various people saying, read this book. It's a huge achievement. So the question I need to ask you, and it's for my sake as well as for the audiences, this transition from a filmmaker to writing history, how did that come about? So silently, it must have been a private decision, a private journey. Can you talk to us about it?
Well, before I actually answer that question, for our readers, for our audience, I just like to share that speaking with Saleem today is a huge, huge, huge privilege, and it means so much to me because Saleem, probably for those who don't know, has been my teacher. And although he was not my formal teacher in college, but I used to go to him very often with some of my work, and he would, laboriously correct all of that. And more importantly, the journey, into the world of Tawaifs began with conversations with Saleem. It's actually Saleem who started me off. So Saleem, thank you. You are the reason why all this, how all this started, and how we are now here talking to each other. And as far as the transition from being a filmmaker to, well, writing this book is concerned, it wasn't really, I, there was a lot of material that I had gathered, and I think I had met you in 2003 when I'd come and stayed with you in London. I was, if you remember, I was researching for the film at that point of time. And then over the years, because the film took 8 years, 9 years in the making, there was a lot of material that I had gathered as research, which obviously the film has a certain confined frame. So that couldn't be accommodated within the film. And so, friends and family, everyone, actually, it was their goading to begin with and say, no, 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 all this work will go to waste and you must write and it must be utilized somewhere. And actually, it's that I, applied for the India Foundation fellowship. And, I got the fellowship. And I started little knowing actually what was in store for me, because all that material that I thought was huge and didn't amount to perhaps even a chapter. So there was just opened up this whole area of new research, archival research, and also field work. I mean, much more additional field work. So that's how the journey started, pretty much.
But the field work must have been from scratch, because when you were researching for a film, must have been very different from when you were researching for a history.
Absolutely. I for the one thing was that the groundwork had already been done, thanks to the film. So, I mean, in the sense that my introductions had been made, people knew me within the community, I was a familiar figure, and many of them had seen the film and really liked it. And so there was this acceptance. At least I didn't have to start from scratch, as far as the field book was concerned. But certainly, in terms of, spending time with the families, I hadn't had to do that for the film. I mean, certainly. Now, that took years actually, all because it was like spending, just being there, observing, hearing conversations, and well, being allowed in. I think that period of time allowed that relationships to be forged between me and these families, and for them to actually, and they were very generous to accept me as a certain presence there and share all these conversations with me. So that took long. That took long. The archival work took also pretty long, because there was this, I mean, there was the book is histories set within certain macro history of the of India in the making. That also took its own time.
Uh, but the acceptance, both for the film and the subsequent research, can you talk about that process with people? Your informants open up, the process of gaining their trust, letting you film, bringing in a film that allows a certain kind of trust, because they're ready for the camera, and when you switch on the camera, but to let you in into unguarded moments
You know now,
and to share private. Yeah,
Salim, actually, yeah, sorry. Salim,
yeah, go
actually,
ahead.
you had again. I owe to trust building again with you. If you remember, I don't know if you remember this conversation way back in 2002, 2003, when I had just begun the research on the film, and I was facing all these doors shutting on my face, because why would anyone wish to speak to me? I mean, especially no one in the community. I was this unknown filmmaker. Who was I? What did I want to do? There was suspicion, and justifiably so. They were suspicious of me. And if you remember, I'd come to you, and I was feeling very sorry for myself. And I told you, I said, Salim, maybe I should have a man with me, coming with me on these trips, because maybe, the women, I mean, their former wives, they might feel more comfortable with men around, and they might open up to me more, because I would be going on my own or with another, woman research associate. And you told me, don't do that. If you have to build trust as woman to woman. Because, and you had told me, you said that actually their most intimate relationships are with other women. You were so right. That persisted, thanks to you, thanks to your good advice. And it was over the years. I mean, relationships with anyone don't get built overnight. So, yes, it was a process of give and take, where I, putting myself out, I was being honest. And I think the most important thing that helped me gain trust was that I was respectful. I mean, people can gauge if your respect for them is genuine or just a sham. And I think that really helped. A certain degree of mutual respect, a high degree of mutual respect. That, I think, was the bedrock of the relationships that I was over time able to forge with very many different former wives, and then, their families, who have now moved on to other spheres. So it was a long process. It was these are relationships built over years. Is over, those relationships continue, and I'm much the richer for that.
Yeah, yet there would have been these differences of class and background. What sort of efforts did you need to overcome those uh, um, hesitations of class and background? I mean, you were from a different class, you were from a different background. you spoke another language, literally and
Absolutely.
metaphorically. Did it take, what was that effort? What effort did you need beyond respect for that? Because you're not dealing with one, as we see in the book. There are multiple people you are talking to and
Yes, absolutely.
who are opening up to you. Yeah.
I think, as I said, absolutely. I think what what is important. I mean, I think that is true for relationships that one forges, not just with our families, but even as a filmmaker in the past also, I've worked with numerous kinds of people, different kinds of people, and I think it's been equally true for them that one is open. Class, I come from a different background. Actually, I also come from a different sexuality. The point is, here was I was married, I came from a certain background with all of that. And I think that there has to be a certain awareness and with an humility attached to that. That given that this is my background, this is the other person's. There has to be respect and also a humility that you cannot assume that you understand everything about them. I think that's really very important. Space open, there would be hesitations, and even in the book traces that actually I talk about that. Where at points of time I felt that even say the main person who's becomes my friend and who leads, whose family then I meet and talk to, that she would hesitate at points of time, perhaps because of the fact of the difference of my background and a hesitation of whether I would accept, you know, a certain part of the story. And of course, I would, but you have to have that humility to know that yes, it is verifiable, and there needs to be patience. There needs to be actually an extra effort. Also, just giving people space. Also, respecting that there will be certain points, areas of life which they want to keep private, and you can't just walk in and expect that, oh, now we are friends and now they have to share everything with me. I didn't. For me, that is not how it works. So yes, whenever I felt that those areas of silences were there, it was not very convenient for my research, but I respected those silences, let them be, to the time that when any one of them felt like actually talking to me about it. And if they didn't, Salim, then, well, one just let it go then. So I think that those things are very important. Also, I think that the for Tawaifs really, they move across classes because they are adept at entertaining men, at least, from classes from a class very different from their own. Actually, that is true even for the person who is my main informant in the book, and the people that she had kind of entertained or been in relationships with. So she had a certain access to class. I think it was her own familiarity and a certain ways of, kind of class that the effort came more, I think, also as much from her side as it was from mine.
And what were the things that tested this relationship most? Because there are times
I
when
think the
it's
what
your
tested the
relationship
relationship,
becomes, yeah, yeah.
yeah, very fraud. I think that was the ill treatment of the Tawai families. Of the married daughters, of the daughters-in-law. I mean, here were these wonderful women who'd made their own lives. Um, and of course, he faced huge challenges, been beaten, survived, sometimes come down, all of that. uh, Sadly, one would, there was an expectation. I think and that was perhaps, that is where, my own naivety, that expectation that then Tawaif families would be these wonderful spaces for all women. Well, sadly, they aren't. I mean, patriarchy works out within even these families, and I don't think that is because of contemporary times. There's always been that, and married women. Uh, Within Tawai families, there's actually a great deal of pride कि हम उनको पर्दे में रखते हैं. You don't bring them out, and that comes with its own attendant ways of, being denied all kinds of rights. So I think that even in the book I write about it, that
Yeah, yeah,
tested out my at times severely.
yeah. That brings me to the next obvious question: is um, recently in the last couple of decades particularly, the Tawaif project has become a major project, both with both with
Yes.
academics and with performers, dancers as well as singers. And I think there's a certain glamorization, certain romanticization, certain attribution of agencies to all the wives, which clearly, as your book shows, and that's where one of the great parts of your book is that you don't have any stars in your eyes. You talk about things as they are. What do you have to say about this attitude of people who are going into Tawaif studies or studying Tawaifs with these preconceived notions of Tawaifs being some sort of essential feminists?
I think it's wonderful that being raised and being uh, invisibilized forever, like forever. There is now, at least, Tawaifs and Tawaifs cultures are eliciting interest, and a huge amount of interest. Um, my only word of caution to researchers or to performers who are working on in the community is that, look, don't don't project upon the community stuff that you want them to be, because no community, no people are like that. I think that the thing of putting upon them, and I think that's not happening just now. I think even if you see some of the earlier writing, which was very far and in between, there was a tendency to bestow upon them a certain amount of a celebration, about which and an celebration, and also actually faulty analysis based upon certain faulty analysis. Uh, I think that it's a continuation of that, where we want our wives to be poster girls for feminism. Uh, just I think if you are studying them or anyone, I'm any any performers, then you see them within their own context, within their own, they are a product of a certain kind of a historical process, a certain cultural process. You have to study that within that context. I think the what is really problematic and what probably leads to this kind of mindless celebration is that the things are not, the culture is not contextualized. If you are contextualizing it within a certain material reality from which it was emerging, then this whole thing of, oh, this was this great liberated space, completely like liberated from patriarchy, you wouldn't say that, because after all, this was they were they were performers, and as performers they were completely dependent for their survival on patronage, as were all other performers. I mean, male musicians, everyone else. So I mean, when your survival is based upon patronage, these are patronage based cultures, then that recognition itself should be sobering. And then it should one, it demands certain amount of critical thinking and also more work, more nuanced work. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, but what the nuances that you are talking about can only be achieved by a much deeper study and a closer uh, access to these people. Because what has happened about with the study of Tawaifs has been the study of individual Tawaifs, the ones who were very successful and therefore and who had
Yeah.
reinvented themselves very successfully, and therefore anything that they said was bought, and people believed it, and that became the narrative of what a Tawaifa was or should be. What was around them was rarely studied. And I think this is where the success of these Tawaifas was, that they were able to very successfully reinvent themselves and disguise their backgrounds and everything around themselves in a way that mm, discouraged people. People presumed that they knew everything, and it's only when you go that as deep as you did into layer upon layer upon layer that you can have that access. And that is why what I need to ask you is not just studying the Tawaifs but also the repertoire, which is in great demand. That these people had a repository of um, musical compositions and dances and this thing. And it's, how does a modern performer access them? Is it just as simple as going to them and asking them for it? um, can transference of repertoires take place as simply as that? I mean, you've made the other song and you've seen what happens to repertoires when, over a period of time and under different social and cultural circumstances. So, how do you feel about this? About repertoire and its borrowing of this and performing it in a different context?
See, I have mixed feelings about it because at one level, at a very practical level, I worry that because I am privy to some of these families and their repertoires, and I worry about the fact that these repertoires will die. Once the last performers are gone, and many of them are going, most of them are elderly, and I mean, no one is immortal. So so that it would be such a shame, and already there's so much of this, repertoire of music that's got lost. So yes, as as a music lover, as someone who's worked on Tawaif cultures, I am deeply invested that these repertoires should survive, and even if it means that they are performed in another context, um, I am open to that. But of course, with some caveats, which is that very often the taking of the performance or the transference of repertoires has happened in a fairly exploitative manner. Where it's all very well that you, under the project of so-called saving a repertoire or bringing it to a wider audience, well, the original performers, the families, who have actually been the carriers and who preserved these repertoires and who've carried them and nurtured them, they are kind of relegated to the sidelines, and that hurts, and I find that extremely problematic. Um, I've also written about that in the book, so I've mentioned that. I do feel that there should be a certain fairness and parity. I mean, if you're taking something from someone, then that person should also gain something in return. What is that person gaining? If you are gaining something, then the other person should gain something. So, though that is so, having said that, yes, some these I there is a, of course I recognize that these repertoires came out of a certain cultural context, were performed within a certain cultural context. But already, Salim, I feel that these repertoires have already undergone many transformations within, as far as the Tawaif performers themselves are concerned. You know, so some one of the हमारी पुरानी चीज है, for instance, if they tell you, हमारे घर की चीज है, so the way say their great great grandmother would have performed it, the cultural context, the patronage, you know, the patrons to whom she would have performed it would have been very different. And we don't know along the way how many, then say, what someone performing the same song in the 1960s or 70s, you know, that would be very different. And in that process, the kind of changes that happen within, you know, the culture itself, I mean, within the generations to that particular song, for instance. You know, what I'm saying is that it's easier to assume that, oh, if it goes outside from the transference from Tawaif musicians to middle class musicians, you know, the kind of one there, as one assumes that there would be a certain loss there, the ways. But you know, my argument is, and from what I've understood, is that actually over the generations, because you know, patronage changed, the profile of patrons changed, there was a certain kind of proletarization of the way down, that that repertoire also has actually probably undergone changes. I mean, I assume it has. So, I mean, the point is, what I'm making is that, see, to assume that something which is with the Tawaifs is somehow innately in its pure state and it will somehow get corrupted if it is performed outside, I don't necessarily assume that. You know, I think that those ways in which changes happen, and it's it's fine as long as the repertoire. I actually am very invested in some of those repertoires surviving, because I guess I'm been so closely involved with these families that, and it worries me. But for me, the major concern, really, as I said earlier, is that it should be it should be a fair transference. You know, both sides should be gaining something and not just one side. That for me is a very major concern.
Yeah, what you say about the repertoire from your book, I was surprised to know or realize that Hindi film music was being performed in the kotas in the 70s or the 60s. I mean, as casually as their own traditional repertoire. I mean, it had become a part of their repertoire, Hindi, Bollywood or Hindi film songs. So, yes, you're right about that, but the problem of the repertoire stays. I mean, we all know that some way has to be found of saving it, preserving it, documenting it. Documenting is, I think, the most important way of saving it. Now, let me ask you another question that intrigued me. Um, your, I mean, this history was a history um, that's waiting to be written. And the fact that no one had written it was because it was a subject that was not easy. And it needed someone like you to come up and write this history, a history that will last for a very, very long time. And the reason I think why you were so successful in doing it is this method that you found of writing this complicated, layered history at multiple levels. You know, writing, addressing your main informant as a friend in the second person, recording life histories and memories and your own reaction to them. And of course, you yourself are interpreting and reinterpreting them while you are telling them. And a third larger history, which is a as a traditional historian, you placing them in the context of the development of the nation, which I thought was brilliant. These three levels. How did you arrive at this? It couldn't have been easy. It must have been a lot of false starts and rewriting and going back and saying, let me do it this way, let me do it that way. It couldn't have come automatically. I'm not ready to believe that. But that you arrived at it is where
It,
the brilliance of the book lies.
Thank you, but the fact is that I see, there are certain decisions I made, I guess, because I did know better. As a first time writer, this is my maiden book. So, the kind of confidence that one has with the language of images. I'm a filmmaker by training, and yes, and for almost of most of my life, I've been a filmmaker. So, I think one thing that I did work on, and I think part of this is that I fell back upon my own training as a filmmaker. So, without consciously saying, oh, this is how I would do a film, I think I was also approaching it a lot of times without knowing better as I would a film. Probably in this case, it worked to a certain extent. But it was always a huge struggle. And I think for me, the biggest challenge was that here I was writing the histories of people who are alive. And these are people who do not wish for their identities to be revealed. So now, how am I going to be? How does one write an honest account of people's lives and yet protect their identities? It really took me it's much easier to write about people who are dead and gone. um, that posed a huge challenge, and I think it took me the longest to try and work my way around that. And I think it's then that actually I did away with the need for putting a name to the main character altogether. The entire book is structured as a conversation between me and her, and she's in the second person. But also meant that actually all the other characters, not only that their names have to be changed, but the background of this family, their associations had to be, you know, fuzzied up enough for it to be confusing to even people who might otherwise know them. जैसे अरे वो तो वैसी नहीं है, उसके बारे में हो सकता है नहीं, लेकिन ये तो वो नहीं है. So for me, that was very daunting. How do I do that? And so because I was stuck in this mold, everything has to be exactly how it was told to me. In terms of the narrative, exact how it was. I think it's over a period of time that I realized for myself that there's a greater truth than just the truth of the spoken word, of what they are. And that is that I have to be truthful and honest about the 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 larger truth, the essence of what they are telling me. That is what is really, really important. And in the process, because I have to have, and that's my responsibility, my duty, I have to protect their identities. Yes, I have to fuzzy up things if it means certain times there, say, two characters have been they're composite characters. I put two or three characters together, because it is the history of a family, and that way the accounts in themselves are truthful. But it doesn't have to be necessarily that it is the of one a particular person. So if I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but for me, I found that way out for myself. I It was very liberating. I mean, in the sense that I could work, I could find my way. But yes, always remaining very faithful to the intent, what was said to me, and what they wanted conveyed. I think that was really important. What was the essence of those stories? What they wanted conveyed through those stories? Or what they wanted conveyed through those stories? That to me, I felt that was my duty to be really, really faithful to that, which I was. So but it took very long. It really took very long to work these things through. A lot of times, but it wasn't fits and starts. There were times I would write breezily because without actually, even consciously realizing it, I would start writing it like a film script. Then I would say, no, no, this, then you rework on it. But it worked out eventually, somehow or the other. Times, yeah, it took 10 years to write this book. Over a period of time, I started, I mean, the first phase was very painful. But over the later phase, I started enjoying writing it. I think I also became more sure where I was and what I was doing. And then, yes, it started coming together for me.
Yeah, listening to you right now, it struck me when this analogy that you made as a filmmaker and while writing this thing that it was like writing a script. You have the sense there. It's up to you as to arrange and rearrange it, and where you're going to place what story at what point, and how you're going to tell it. Is it going to be flashback? Is it going to be in the present tense? Now that you say it, it makes complete sense to me that only you as a filmmaker could have come up with this strategy, because it was the strategy that I found extremely impressive. And also, the only way the story could have been told. Honestly, I can't see this very complicated, multi-generational story being told so vividly by anyone else but a filmmaker who could actually see the story unfolding. Now, what was their reaction to the book? How many of them got an idea of how the book turned out? Did they listen to it? Did someone read it to them? Did people tell them? What was their reaction?
No, I've told them. I took first thing I did was that I had when the book came out, then I'd made a trip, which is pretty when the film had got done. I'd made a trip to Banaras, and had gone with DVDs. Now, in this case, I went bearing some of the copies of the book. Um, and they were extremely, I mean, the main character, of course, the illustration on the which is it's a beautiful illustration done by Arijit Sen. The main character, this childlike innocent vanity, said ये बिल्कुल हमारी तरह है, ये बहुत अच्छी फोटो तुमने हमारी इस्तेमाल की. Doesn't look anything like her, but so no, I told her, I went over the book because of course she doesn't read English. So I went over the book with her each story. And so she said, yes, okay. And then at times she would say, but that you didn't say that part, did you? And I said, no, I knew you didn't want that to be said. Because there were so many things. In fact, through the writing of the book, I was in constant because I wouldn't be sure that there was certain things, in that moment, in the intensity of a moment, people tend to share a lot of intimate secrets. Also, because I was over the years, after all, I'd known that family now for how long? I've known them over 10, 15 years. Now, of course, over that period of time. But in that writing phase itself, it had been about 8, 10 years. So I was a friend. I mean, they told me a lot of things. And so there was always this to and fro. I was also always very conscious of the fact that my book is not important, more important than their lives. So they had, if there was something I felt, I should run it past them to see if they are okay with it, even though their identities are being blurred. you know I would do that. So they knew there are a lot of things that they did know कि ये भी नहीं होगा, वो भी नहीं होगा. And but there were times very happily for me when they say, of course, go right ahead, why don't you must write about it, things which I would feel hesitant about. So yeah, they've all seen the book. The main person, my friend, she told me, she said, I don't want to keep the book. So she because her grandchildren are now grown up. I mean, and they can read English. And so she didn't want. She said, "You keep my copy with you." And so then I realized that, yeah, that of course, when I'd given her the DVD, the children were very young, so it was all right. She has the DVD, but now she doesn't display that. But the book was a different ball game, such a fat, big book, and the children, of course, read English. So she didn't want that book around, and especially now where she is, which is understandable. But she's very proud of it, and
Uh,
I keep informing her of what's happening. A lot of the other people in her family, her cousins, her sister, they are no more. So, I mean, unfortunately, her aunt, Pyari Khada, I mean, I wish she had been there to have seen the book, because she would really have loved it, and I'm sure she would have kept a copy. But so there weren't that many people, and sadly, left with whom I could share this. Unlike when the film was made, there were all these people, and we had partied, and it was really very nice. But this time round, it's a small circle of people.
Obviously, the next question is there a translation coming?
Obviously, the next question is there a translation coming?
Well, there's a Marathi that's underway,
No,
and
a Hindi translation.
so I would very much like a good Hindi Urdu translation. Um, and but thus far, no, at the moment, it's not happening. I mean, for whatever reason, I'm not aware
Yeah,
of
but this would make it
anything.
more accessible to them in case they or someone from their circle wanted to
Absolutely,
read it.
definitely. And also, I think
Yeah,
it really is a story that needs to be told in Hindi
absolutely.
Urdu, definitely.
Yeah.
So I was, and because there's just so much uh, in terms of the language. I tried as well as I could, but I don't know how good a job I could do to translate, especially in Bhojpuri. But it's that earthiness, the humor, the quirky humor, which is so much in Bhojpuri. Uh, it's very difficult to translate that in any other language, especially in English. So I think, yes, if it came out in Hindi, all that would be there. That would add to the richness.
No, no, you've done it very well. I mean, the translations are very well, not just of the dialogue, but also um, of uh, translation of the lyrics. I was particularly impressed by when you translate the lyrics. I know an unfair question. Um, is there anything you would have liked to do differently with the book?
Um,
Or anything that you wanted to do more?
More. Uh, I didn't do more of the book. I was wanted it to end, frankly, after a point. I mean, 10 years was long enough. I'd been on that book. Um,
And 700 pages, yeah.
yeah, it's like, I can't think of. It's not that I feel, oh, this is great or anything, Saleem. It's not that. It's just that actually I never stay very much with any of my work. One, it's done. I don't think that much about it. I haven't really thought whether I should have done what I could have done differently. I mean, I think there are people and people. I mean, there are filmmakers who sit and they brood over their work, and then there are filmmakers who keep changing editing their work. For instance, even after it's been screened, depending on what the reaction has been, then they keep working on it, because film, you can't do that in a film. You can't do that in a published book. I've never done that. Once a film is over for me, it's over. So regardless of whether, well, okay, later, yes, something can. Of course, as a filmmaker, definitely there are times when I say, "Oh Lord, I cringe," and I wish I hadn't done this or I hadn't done that. But I never change it. I mean, and also I don't sit and brood too much about it. I just move to something. I mean, it's just that that's how it is, and I don't think I take my work so seriously, beyond a point. I mean, I do take it very seriously while I'm doing it, but it's out there, it's in the public domain. Now you have to think of something else.
So, what are you moving to next? What's next? A film or
Well, at
another
the
book?
moment, this I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. Saleem. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Let's see. I film because it's a long time, and film is the language I feel most comfortable in. That's my language. That's my medium. Um, so I had always told myself, and I used to promise myself that was a little goodie, that if you finish your book, then you'll do a nice little film to energize yourself. That was something that I had kind of created to look forward to. That so, um, but I don't know now how hopefully, I mean, if things work out, maybe a film. Yeah.
So,
You know,
I'm
I've
being
gone around.
given.
So maybe I can think of something else, but it's daunting. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been giving. We're running out of time, Saba. It was great talking to you, seeing you after ages. We really haven't spent much
And it was
time
such a
with
pleasure talking to
talking to each
you.
other for
Thank you
so
so
long.
much.
And once again, congratulations. It is really an impressive piece of work. Um, it's going to last forever, honestly. It wasn't an easy
Thank you. Thank you so
job,
much.
and you've done ticked all the boxes. Made an extreme. When I saw the size of the book, I said, honestly, I was a little skeptical, and it took me no time. I finished it in 2.5 days. It was so readable. At the same time, such a great piece of history writing. As simply as a piece of history writing, I think you have scored on all fronts there. Congratulations.
No, Salim, actually, things, there have been other reviews and people have said nice things and have been kind to me. But your words mean the most to me because coming from you, uh, being a historian, being someone someone I look up to, and a writer, such a fine translator and writer yourself, and someone who started me on this. It means a lot to me, and I really would like to value your words for creating this opportunity. I could be in conversation with Salim. It really is one of the most. It was very meaningful for me. It meant a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Value the words. Uh, I think we kept our time limit.